Good afternoon. My name is Mark Bartig, and I am the CRO of IGI Cybersecurity, and I just want to welcome everyone to our CMMC Level 2 From Requirements to Readiness webinar. I'm excited today to share with you the agenda. If you want to go to the next slide, Wayne. We'll do some quick introductions of who's on the call. We'll give you a CMMC Level 2 overview, how to achieve readiness assessment preparation, the certification process, and ongoing compliance. And I'm super excited today to introduce you to Wayne Proctor. Wayne Proctor is a cyber consultant here at IGI who is also a CCA, which is a certified CMMC assessor. And that means he has the experience to not only do readiness, but he's also qualified to perform audits. However, at IGI, our focus is bringing the highest quality individuals to readiness and having that experience make the process more streamlined and effective for our customers. In addition, Wayne was the CISO of over 7 different companies, including UPS, and understands that readiness is a partnership, and in order to be effective in your company's teams, you will have to be heavily involved in the process. What better resource to work with than someone that has been in your shoes and is now on the other side helping you get ready. Super excited to introduce you to Wayne, and without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Wayne to share all the great insights he's put together. Thank you. Wayne?
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm glad you could join us today. I am, as Mark said, Wayne Proctor. I'm going to take us through the entire CMMC process. It's going to have to be a lot of it at an overview level, but you'll see the whole process of what CMMC is about, the readiness process, the assessment process, and how to stay compliant. So there's a lot of information to cover. What we're considering here at IGI is to doing some more webinars in the future where we go deeper on certain areas. So if there's any area where you do want us to dig deeper, do let us know so we can do that. But this first slide I want to share with you is really giving some facts. This will get us all on the same page with CMMC. Some of these things you may know or may not know, but the very first fact is the one that's highlighted up top, and this is just a key thing that's good for everyone to know, that CMMC Level 2 is really about validating that you've implemented NIST 800-171 effectively to protect the confidentiality of CUI. So why I'm stressing validation is that, you know, DoD contractors have been required for years, I think it's back to like late 2017, required to be compliant with NIST 800-171. But over time, the government determined that really companies just weren't really implementing it. So now CMMC is to verify with Level 2 by a third party that you are compliant. And why I'm stressing confidentiality is we know in security, we usually look at confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but all of the controls for 800-171 and CMC are all about protecting the confidentiality of CUI. So I'll take you through from left to right, top to bottom. We'll go through this so you can see some of the facts to help you understand the program a bit better. The first one here is that you need a C3 PAO to perform your assessment. That's the validation part we had just talked about. It is a 3-year frequency, so you're going to have to be assessed not just one time, but every 3 years by a C3 PAO, and have annual affirmations. So every year you got to sign off. Actually, one of the executives at your company need to sign off that your company is maintaining CMMC compliance. So now, as you probably all know, we're in a 3-year rollout cycle for CMMC to get it fully rolled out. And that began November 10th of last year. Phase 1 goes through November 9th of this year. And for Level 2, the requirement in Phase 1 is self-assessments. So you're going to start to see contracts from the DoD that require level 2, and that is a self-assessment. Now the next box here says DoD discretion, and there's a lot of DoD discretion because CMMC is the DoD's program, so they have some discretion to be able to slightly change, if required, the program. So under the DoD discretion, they could, if you have a very sensitive contract, they could say, yeah, I know we're in phase 1, but you, for this contract, need to have a C3PO assess you. Or they could go the other way, and if they really need a service and then no one is CMMC certified yet to offer that service, they could allow a contractor to still get the contract without CMMC. That's probably going to be very rare as more people get certified, but they have discretion, so that's what that is all about. So this next box is talking about NIST 800-171 controls, which is what CMMC is strictly based on. That's broken out into 14 families or domains of security controls, 110 different practices or controls that have to be implemented, and 320 objectives. And the objectives tell you what you have to have in place and to be able to give evidence of to show that you have those practices in place. So that is why, and you see in the next box, it's talking about you have to do your preparation, and the assessment is at the objective level. So let me explain a little bit about practices versus objectives. So the practice, as we said, is the control. The objectives tell you what you have to have in place to prove that you really have that control in place. So say that one control or practice is to have access control for people to access the systems. So if you have that in place, the objectives may say you have to have a definition of who those people are that are allowed to access. You have to have management approval for those people to have access. You have to have controls implemented, technical controls, to make sure that only those people that are authorized can get through. So it's just, most of the practices have maybe at least one, sometimes up to a dozen different objectives you have to have in place. And if you don't have every objective in place, you fail that practice in your assessment. So it's really an objective level assessment. So if we're on the bottom now, no SSP, which is System Security Plan. So if you don't have a System Security Plan, you just have, in no way can you be assessed. That's a key document that the C3PAO needs. So that's kind of their guidebook to your whole assessment, because that describes your security program in detail. So my recommendation is that you start your system security plan at the beginning of your readiness and just keep building it throughout the process. And that way you're not at the end trying to pull everything together. The next two boxes here are both about fines and penalties that you can have if you do not become compliant, but you have one of these contracts that you said you were compliant. So across the bottom here, you can see the different information about the penalties. So if you have a false claim act, so basically if you committed or you said that you were compliant, like one of your attestations, say in year 2, you say, I am compliant, but later the government finds out that you did not have the controls in place, then you can have some civil penalties. And as you can see on the bottom there, over 13,000 to over 27,000 per violation. And every single time that you invoiced the government and got paid, that's a violation. So you can see if it went on for a while, this could stack up. Treble damages, which really means triple damages, that's 3 times the recovery total. So based upon whatever the government recovered from you for different kind of fines, you then, for your treble damages, have to pay 3 times that amount on top of those penalties. And for whistleblower, that's if someone turns you in and says, this company really doesn't have these controls. They can get 15 to 30% of the total recovery money for themselves. So say that the fine is $1 million, they could get up to $300,000 for themselves. So there's a lot of incentive there for people to report if you don't have the controls in place. So hopefully all that information, I know it was a lot, but hopefully that gives you a good view of the overall program on a high level. So let's go now down into talk about the readiness process. So the readiness process in this diagram, the 3 top symbols are the main phases of readiness. The bottom boxes are to let me deep dive into certain subjects that you really need to be aware of. But let's talk a little bit about scoping, because scoping is really the most important thing that you have to do. If you don't do scoping properly, then your whole assessment is going to be incorrect, all your information. So with scoping, you have to, and this is just, I'll go through it quickly, but this is things you have to make sure you have in place. So you have to understand for your scoping, where is your FCI and your CUI? So not only where is it, but who deals with it, what process, what systems process, store, and transmit this information. You got to identify all the assets that are involved in this CUI. And asset, we think of assets as, IT equipment, but assets in CUI are hardware, software, networks, users, facilities, and services. So assets is a very broad definition, and you have to have an inventory of all those assets. And it's super important to do that before you get into the rest of the readiness process, because otherwise you don't have a scope. You don't know what to look for or what to assess against. So very important to have that inventory developed of everything related to your CUI. You have to identify your system boundaries. So it's basically, where does that CUI flow? Where does it flow through and from? What cloud environments are involved? How's your remote access and your segmentation? So for system boundaries, you need to understand the network diagram related to CUI and the data flow, and those documents can be combined. Now, the next thing on the top here is external service providers. I'm calling that out separately. The services that the external service providers provide is a service, so that's one of your assets. But external service providers, it's really important that you understand those and how they fit into your scope. So the external service provider, say you have an MSP. The MSP, if they are CMMC certified themselves, that's great, because you can tell your assessor that. Or if they're FedRAMP moderate, then you're running in a CMMC equivalent environment, so you're good. But if you have an MSP that's not CMMC certified or running in FedRAMP, then you have a situation where you have to include that MSP in your scope. So they're going to have to provide you evidence and be interviewed during your assessment. They're basically part of your assessment process if they're not already certified themselves. And then you've got to remember that even though you built up this asset list for all of the hardware, software, and security services, you have to define and classify all those into one of these buckets, because this C3 PAO will treat and assess you differently based upon what bucket these different systems are put in. So if you have a CUI asset, that's something that manages or transmits, stores, or processes CUI, those systems need to comply with every control, and they're going to be fully assessed. Security protection assets do not have CUI, but they protect CUI. So they're going to be looked at by the C3PO in a different way. The contractor risk managed assets, those are systems on the same network as the CUI, but they should never have CUI. So those systems are going to make sure, they're just going to spot check those systems, not look at them all, but they're going to make sure that those systems are following your general security practices in the company. And specialized assets, those are assets that may have CUI, but they just cannot implement the CUI CMMC controls. So those systems are going to look at how you protect those systems. Maybe you segment them, but how do you protect those systems because they can't get all the controls? And then your out of scope assets, you might want to show them in your diagram, not every single one, but just to show the different out of scope groupings. But those are not assessed at all. Those are out of scope and don't have CUI and can't have CUI. So I know that took a while to go through, but scoping is super important. So if you get that right, your whole assessment is going to be focused correctly. So on box 2 here, the gap analysis, basically that, now that you know your scope, you know what to do your gap analysis against. But you've got to go through and look at every practice, every control, all the 320 different objectives, and see, are you compliant or are you not compliant? If you are compliant, collect the evidence that you're compliant, start to gather that during the gap analysis. In the gap analysis, you have to define and say how you've implemented the control, and you got to say who is responsible for the different objectives. So it's really not just identifying gaps, but documenting what you have, and you put that information all into your system security plan. The scoping we talked about, you put that all in the system security plan also in the very top of the document describing your environment. On control implementation, that's kind of a project management task. That's why project management is right under it. But basically, that's the process of making sure you get all these gaps closed. And a big thing for me when you go through the control implementation is prioritization. You want to close the most risk that you can in the beginning of your process. And what I always recommend our clients to do is to implement the level 1 controls first if you're not already level 1 compliant, because then you can start to win those contracts. So just don't do them all as you work through your plan, but prioritize. So that's what control implementation is a lot about. Required documentation, I have a whole separate slide on that. We won't go through all this in detail, but every single line here could be a separate document. And in a lot of cases, it's easier if they are all separate documents. But the ones listed under system security plan can be inserted into your system security plan. The identification of all those assets, or at least you'd want to have a summary of your asset information in the system security plan. Network diagrams, data flow diagrams are very common. People normally put those into the system security plan. Customer responsibility matrix, think of a big matrix, every single control and objective, who's responsible for those. And a lot of those, you're going to inherit your controls from your third parties. That's why it's important that you understand what they do for you. Then you can say that, oh, this is done by a third party. If they're compliant, great. If they're already CMMC compliant, you can just inherit those controls. If they're not, then they've got to give proof that those controls you're inheriting, they actually have in place. But this basically a giant document, a matrix document describing all the controls and who's responsible for each one. The evidence tracker, we'll talk about it in detail coming up on another slide, but it's basically a document where the C3PAO can understand all the evidence that relates to your different controls. So as far as evidence, you do need to have that all at the objective level, and you've got to understand from your external service providers how they play into that and collect all their evidence, and then all your policies and procedures. And one thing I'll tell you on that, some companies think that they're going to provide their policies and procedures they already have that are not aligned to CMMC. It's much easier for you if your policies are structured after CMMC. So much easier for the assessors to find proof of your policy and procedures if you structured it that way. That's something maybe we should talk about later in more detail, but that's very important. And then your plan of action and milestones. If anything's not in place, some of the controls are allowed to be put on a poem. So after your assessment, you can be certified as someone that's temporarily certified, and then you have 180 days to correct things that are on the poem. Not all controls are allowed to be on a poem. We're not going to go into it in this presentation, but all of the controls are rated, usually on a point system from 1 to 5. Those controls that are rated as a 5 are more important, and those controls usually cannot be on a poem, but it's all spelled out exactly what can and cannot be on your poem. But that's another document you have to have if you don't have everything fully in place at the time of your assessment. All right, so that got through the required documentation. On evidence, I'll go through here a little faster. But on evidence, you really need, like we said, always have your evidence for every objective. Keep in mind that the C3 PAOs for evidence will examine, interview, or test your systems. The one that you can get fully ready for is examine, which means have all your artifacts collected. There's a lot of artifacts you have to collect, so there's a lot of ways to do it. I'm going to tell you how I recommend that you do it. And artifact organization, I'd create a folder system and create those folders based upon governance artifacts, technical artifacts, and operational artifacts. And then put your evidence and name your evidence so it's clear, and then create a evidence mapping document. And why I'm suggesting this is because many pieces of evidence can be used as evidence for multiple different objectives, even across families of controls. If you try to make your evidence duplicative and put them the same document throughout all your evidence folders, it just becomes a mess. So the ideal way for me is to have one document and just have a matrix to say what that document applies to. So for time's sake, I'll go through this quickly. On governance is basically all your policy plans, executive reporting, anything you can think of as governance would go in that area. Technical artifacts are more your screenshots, but it's basically about all your different technical controls. I structure those folders, the subfolders in that area, to be based upon your technical control areas. And then for operational artifacts, those are all your things like your reviews and your logs, your proof of training, all those kind of things will go in there. And basically the substructure, if you have subfolders for that, is based upon the types of reviews you're doing. So I'll move on. This area we'll be able to go through a bit faster, but just because you got through all that, you did all your readiness, you still don't want to just jump into your C3 PAO assessment. So you want to get ready. You want to really prove that you've got everything organized well. So you want to check your documentation, go through the different objectives, make sure you've got everything organized. Should be in those folders we talked about for evidence. You want to make sure the people, so when you did your system security plan, you stated who is responsible for each objective. Let those people know that they're formally listed as being responsible for those objectives, and they could be interviewed. So they should be ready that, hey, the assessors are coming this week. You may be called for an interview on this topic. Also make sure your rooms are ready. If they're coming on site, make sure you have the room that You know, their security is going to be checked on the way in. You don't want to fail by letting an auditor roam around your facility without proper rights, because that's one of the controls is, you know, visitor security. But you want to make sure you have everything they need. Just verify that it's all reserved and ready and tested. Conduct a mock assessment is an excellent idea. And I'd recommend that you have that done by your C3 PAO, not your readiness partner. And why I say that is because if you're using for your mock assessment the same C3 PAO that you're going to use for your actual assessment, they can even give you reduced pricing on your assessment because they have already seen and familiar with your documents. So the process is going to go really smoothly when you get to the final assessment. If you do a mock assessment, the results are not reported to the government. So you don't have to start the process over again, like with a real assessment, and pay another, you know, $40,000, $50,000 for another assessment. So doing that mock assessment can save you money and make the whole process smoother. So that's a great idea. But once you have that ready, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just have a question for you. We work with about 30 or so C3 PAOs on readiness. And I think one of the things I hear a lot from them is they'll book a client and then the client will show up not ready in an initial review. I guess it's not ready. They'll move them to the back of the line. So it could be 6 to 9 months before you get audited again. And my question for you is, if I didn't do a mock assessment and that happened, would the government know that I wasn't ready? Or will the government not know if I skip the mock and go straight to the C3 PAO for the audit and they realize I'm not ready?
Well, if you do a actual assessment, the results of your assessment, whether you failed or passed, everything gets reported to the government into a system called EMAS. So yeah, that's another risk, that your results are getting reported. There's also a risk that, and you know, this is all just industry talk, there's nothing official, but if you've reported in the past in your SPURS system, that's a system where people reported their score of self-reported how compliant they are. If you said you have a good SPURS score or you're compliant in the past, and the C3 PAO turns in a report saying you're not compliant, then you do have a false claims risk because you've been collecting money from the government and you're not really compliant. So it's just another reason why a mock assessment is better, to help you get ready, that it's really nothing's being reported, it's just helping you get ready. God, that's a great question, Mark. So after you're through your mock assessment, and you can do it yourself, I just recommend doing it with a C3 PAO. Then you're going through the actual process that they're going to conduct. But once you're ready, contact your C3 PAO, talk about when you could be ready. They'll work with you to get you scheduled. And then the next step is the actual certification process. So this is once you have your C3 PAO, they're going to quickly in the beginning do some planning with you to kind of look through, you know, to revalidate, do you really have your ducks in a row? Do you really understand your scope well? Are you really, they do a sanity check. Are you ready? Once they go through that validation process, they'll jump into the actual assessment. So they'll be working with you every day. For most C3 PAOs, it's at least a 3-day, 5-day process. If you have a very complicated environment, I've heard of it going up to 2 weeks, but usually the 3 to 5 day range is, if you're ready, everything will go through. But they'll start off every day with a meeting to kick off, to say what they're going to do. At the end of the day, you'll hear what they looked at, what if they found anything. And throughout the whole day, you'll be going through assessments, validating your different controls, your different areas, looking for evidence. If they don't have enough evidence, or if they want, they'll ask to interview people that are the responsible parties. You can't just have a manager that has a general overview of the whole area, just answer questions. There has to be the actual people that do the work and they're the ones listed in your system security plan or in that responsibility matrix. But they'll keep going through the areas, keep testing, just marking met or not met on each control, and giving you that information to read out if they're finding any not met. At the end of the review process, you'll get your findings and corrective actions. That's where you can put things on your poem or for submittal of things you have to get done in 180 days. They'll do their report submission. They may recommend you not to be approved because you had some failures that can't go on a poem. They may recommend that you're temporarily certified and you have to clear that poem within 180 days, or they will just say that they recommend you for approval and submit the proof of what they did during the process, and then you'll get your certificate. So that process, like I said, it is usually like a 5-day or less process, so that should go pretty smoothly if you've done all these readiness steps. Really, the readiness is much, much more complicated than the assessment. Now, this next part is just to talk about ongoing compliance. So just because you have your certificate, that's not the end of the journey. You have to always stay compliant. So what I recommend is that you bake your CMMC into your change management of your company. So if anything's changing, you look at the ramifications for CMMC and you'd update your security plan, maybe pull new evidence, update your documentation. So you continually, it could be every day, it could be every week, as things change, keep updating all of your documents. If you have a good GRC system, that's one thing that we on our engagements always bring to the process, so that you can at any time hit a button and print your system security plan. And if you're updating it as part of your regular operations, it's always up to date. You could have changes. If you change any of your external service providers, you'd have inheritance changes to your control matrix. If you change like a key provider, you have to just do the whole assessment over again. Any substantial change in your environment, and you have to do your CMMC over again. So if you have a primary MSP, for example, and you switch out your MSP, you need to do your CMMC validation again, because many things about your controls will be changing. So that's one to keep in mind. That's important. Pre-affirmation validations are important. Every year your executives needs to sign off that you're still CMMC compliant. So I recommend to do an assessment annually, just to give that executive some confirmation that, yeah, we rechecked, everything looks good, go ahead and sign. And then CMMC changes in your environment could be very much impacted by changes to the regulation itself. So right now, CMMC is based on the 800-171 Rev 2. It's changing to Rev 3. We don't know when, but in the next year to 2 years, it'll change to Rev 3. At that time, we're going from 320 objectives to over 400 objectives. So there's going to be a big change, a lot to revalidate, new evidence collect. Really, what I recommend, what we do here at IGI, is we help the customer get ready for the process, and then we recommend we stay with them at a reduced number of hours, but we stay with them to help them stay ready and do those annual validations for them, and that kind of work. So let me go on. How am I doing on time, Mark?
You're doing great. We've got about 25 minutes, so we have plenty of time for questions and plenty of time to go through this real quick, and then we'll open it up.
Okay, so I'll go through just a little bit about IGI and what we offer. Won't spend a lot of time on that, but we do have a full readiness offering. Like Mark said, I'm a CCA, so I'm approved to actually do the assessments with a C3 PAO. But we work at IGI on the readiness side. So we offer a whole suite of readiness assessments that we do. So we can tell you where all your gaps are and help you create your scope and help you get ready with your poem where you can list your gaps and help you with your system security plan. But those are just deliverables. What we prefer to do for clients is to become your partner. We call that our white glove service, where we are with you continually throughout the whole process. And this is really great for companies that don't have a lot of IT staff or don't have people with available time to keep this process going. We will come in, meet with you on a regular basis, give you templates, give you guides, give you assistance, just help you move through the whole process to get compliant, be with you through the assessment as a member of your team, and then to stay with you after to help you keep everything in compliant and do those assessments and help you readjust, like if the 800-171 rev changes. Just this is really, really great service for those customers that just want a real partner to be with them through the whole process. Okay, so that's all I have, Mark.
Great, thanks, Wayne. If you have questions, you're welcome to unmute and ask them, or you can type them in the questions tab. We'll wait a few minutes, see if anybody has any questions, and if not, then we'll wrap up. Wayne, as the listeners are thinking about questions, I got one for you. You talked about an MSP, if you changed MSPs, that you would have to go back through that process. So if I'm an MSP, for example, and I'm working with you on a readiness, what's my requirements? Do I have to be ready as well? Do I have to achieve level 2 if my clients are at a level 2?
No. If you're an MSP, I think it's, especially if you have multiple customers that are DoD contractors and they're going to be CMMC compliant, it's in your best interest to get compliant yourself. But if you're not compliant, then you just need to be part of the assessment with each customer you have. So you have to be interviewed, provide evidence. You're part of every assessment. With all that administration, it'd be easier for you just to get certified yourself. But it's your choice which way you want to go.
We have a question on here, Wayne. How do MSPs find new business performing CMMC audit assessments? Is there an entry-level assessment?
An entry-level assessment. It's really the end goal of CMMC is really well defined. So the trick is really, comes down to how we said we're addressing our snapshot service that we offer. It's really, the trick is defining where the customer is along that roadmap and how they're going to get there. So there's no really, basic baseline, like with a penetration test, you have a baseline test you can perform, and then the price goes up based on how complicated you want to make it. But in CMMC, the complication's already defined. It's 320 different objectives, and it says exactly what you have to have. So, the baseline is the same for everyone because it's the same end goal to be level 2, the same requirements. So it's not really a lower end initial offering that you can come up with.
Wayne, great job. Thank you for the great information today, and thanks to everybody that attended the call. We look forward to the opportunity to work with you if you feel like what we do can help. Thank you so much.